Hello, I'm Cinemod470. In comparison to other assassins in film, the killer stands out for his realistic take on someone who kills people for money. He's not a genetically modified hitman trained from childhood, or a member of a secret society of underworld assassins, or has a unique gimmick for killing people. He's just a common contract killer who just does the job people pay him to do. And everything the killer uses, from his tools to his tactics, are all grounded in reality. And speaking of reality, if you like what I do, subscribe if you haven't. It costs you nothing, but to me it means everything. Most action thriller movies starring an assassin would just cut to the moments before the shot was taken, but instead, the killer's plot begins a full day before the trigger is pulled. Though we don't know much about the protagonist, the day before he takes the shot gives the spectators an idea of his routine. The killer spends time surveying the hotel, getting a sense of the habits of other people who frequent the area, and stays physically active by practicing yoga. The voiceover, in addition to the routine viewed on screen, gives the spectators the hint that this is how the killer handles all of his contracts before he kills them. A lot of surveying and not much else.
If you're unable to endure boredom, this work is not for you.
Since the killer is isolated while surveying his target, there isn't a diegetic way to get a deep understanding of his character, especially since the environment appears to be a rented space and the killer doesn't want to keep any personal items that could identify him to the authorities. So, the film uses voiceover to show the killer's inner thoughts. When it comes to voiceover in film, the consensus is that it's lazy writing. Personally, I believe voiceover exposition can be useful depending on the character and what they're saying. If the purpose is just blunt exposition to tell the spectators what's going on in the narrative, then yes, it's lazy. But if the protagonist doesn't have a traditional moral compass, then it could grant the spectators an understanding of their point of view. For example, serial killers like Dexter Morgan and Joe Goldberg both use voiceover in their respective shows, and they're used to decent effect. Dexter is compelled to kill other killers, and Joe is a murderous stalker. In any other story, they'd be the antagonists, but since they're the protagonists in their respective series, the audience has to get a deeper understanding of them so they're compelling to watch. So both shows employ voiceover so the spectators can hear their thoughts, but keep it limited so they're not an omniscient narrator. The voiceover can also be humorous since it's what Joe and Dexter are both thinking but would never say to other people. Especially with Joe, since there are moments where he'll think something and not realize he's a hypocrite.
Beck, you're too drunk to be alone. What if some sicko had followed you down here?
Jesus, it's like you've never seen a horror movie or the news.
In The Killer, however, the voiceover does restrict what is revealed about the protagonist. The spectators get an understanding of his apathetic view of the world and other people, which is how someone could make a career in assassination without the memory of the victims haunting him.
Consider yourself lucky if our paths never cross. Except, luck isn't real, nor is karma, or, sadly, justice. As much as I'd like to pretend these concepts exist, they just don't.
And it tells us that the killer studies well-known serial killers because they managed to stay active for years without getting caught by the authorities.
Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, murdered at least 49 women over 2 decades. He couldn't spell cat if you spotted him the A and the T. But he was conscientious. WWJ, WBD. What would John Wilkes Booth do?
But we never learn his real name, how long he's worked as an assassin, what motivated him to start, or the exact number of people he's killed. So, there is some mystery to his character despite hearing his thoughts. What also makes the killer unique is its attention to detail and devotion to realism. All the killer's tools and utensils are basic and condensable, so he can pack them up quickly if he's forced to leave the scene and fit them in his jacket. because a man with a suitcase big enough to carry a rifle would be too conspicuous, especially after a murder had taken place. And when the killer has to make his exit, his getaway vehicle is an electric motorcycle, so it can get through alleyways, bypass traffic, and the engine isn't as loud as a regular motorcycle. The killer also doesn't want to leave any trace of his DNA or fingerprints, so he always wears latex gloves when he's in his sniper's nest, and he disinfects the sink after he's finished washing up. He even disposes his phone after he finishes a call. And to ensure he isn't recognized by an eyewitness, most of his clothing is beige colored so the killer doesn't stand out in a crowd. When the killer's finally getting ready to shoot, the film could just have him fire his gun and get it over with, but there is still a routine he has to do to ensure the shot hits its mark. The killer applies eye drops so he doesn't blink while staring down the scope, and waits till his heartbeat is steady to improve his accuracy. The killer also wears what looks like a cheap black raincoat while he's getting ready to shoot, so he's harder to spot in the dark. Plus, the raincoat is thin enough that he can easily pack it away. Though the killer is portrayed to be diligent, methodical, and successful in previous jobs, what makes him interesting is that for the first time in his career, he fails.
Fuck.
By a stroke of bad luck, the shot hits a bystander, and the killer loses his opportunity to finish the job. With no other options, he's forced to egress the scene of the crime before the police arrive. And throughout his escape, there are moments where he appears frustrated and sloppy, like when he struggles to get the lock off his bike, cutting himself shaving so he can change his appearance, and disposing his weapon but forgets to wear gloves. And this failure gives the rest of the film a sense of tension, because now the killer is in uncharted territory, and anything can go wrong no matter how well he plans. The killer stands out as one of the few modern thriller protagonists that doesn't rely on fast action or being a paragon of morality, but instead he thrives on patience and anticipation, while also having a strong foundation built in the world outside your window.